19 Islamic hijackers, armed with box cutters, take over 4 passenger planes flying in the American skies. 2 of these planes are crashed against the Twin Towers in New York, the 3rd plane hits the Pentagon, and the 4th one is crashed intentionally by the passengers in an open field in Pennsylvania. The Twin Towers later collapsed due to a structural failure caused by the impacts and the ensuing fires, killing some 3,000 people. This is, by and large, the official version of the events of 9/11 as told every year by the mainstream media all around the world. But how much do you really know about what truly happened on September 11? And I'm not talking conspiracy theories here. I'm talking about simple, verifiable facts that somehow have gone unnoticed in the big narrative maelstrom that has been 9/11 ever since. So I'm going to ask you a few questions and we'll see how much you really know about 9/11. Pause this video for a moment and go grab pencil and paper so you can write down how many correct answers you get. At the end, I will give you a score telling you what kind of expert you are on September 11. Keep in mind that in order to be considered a real expert, you'll need to answer correctly at least 20 questions out of 23. Also, remember to press pause after each question so you have enough time to think about the correct answer. And keep in mind that some questions are tricky, in that there might be multiple answers to the same question. Okay, let's go. Let's start with an easy one. How many skyscrapers actually collapsed in New York on September 11? 1, 2, 3, more than 3. The correct answer is 3. Besides the Twin Towers, a few hours later, also Building 7 collapsed. It was a 47-story steel skyscraper located right behind the North Tower. The official reason for the collapse was the fires that ignited in Building 7 after it had been hit by the debris of the collapsing North Tower. So we have a first exceptional event for that day, in which the terrorists have managed to entirely destroy 3 skyscrapers with 2 airplanes only. Only one of the many miracles that took place in New York on that day. This brings us to question number 2. Aside from those collapsed at the World Trade Center, how many steel skyscrapers have been completely destroyed due to fire in history? None. 1. Between 2 and 5. About 20. The correct answer is none. Aside from September 11, no steel skyscraper in history has ever collapsed due to fire. Steel skyscrapers simply do not collapse due to fire. They are built for that purpose. You can search as long as you want. You'll never find another steel skyscraper fully collapsed due to fire anywhere in the world. But apparently, the laws of physics were suspended on September 11, and a few isolated fires, not even huge after all, were sufficient to bring down a 47-story steel structure in a little over 6 seconds. This brings us to question number 3. What preceded the collapse of Building 7? A loud rumble? An actual countdown? A public announcement by the police? None of the above, it just collapsed unexpectedly. The correct answer is B plus C. There were both a public announcement by the police and an actual countdown. Not bad for a building that suddenly decides to collapse on its own. This is the public announcement by the police.
At about the same time, when CNN recorded the explosions near Building 7, they also captured the police clearing the area and announcing the collapse.
Keep your eye on that building, it'll be coming down.
The building is about to blow up. Move it back.
Back here. All right, guys? Sorry.
We are looking back. There's a building about to blow up.
You heard them. They said the building is about to blow up, which really doesn't leave much room for interpretation. And this is the witness to the actual countdown.
First responder Kevin McPadden was stationed near Building 7, awaiting for orders from a Red Cross representative.
He kept asking the Red Cross rep, what's going on, what's going on? And all the time he had his hand over the radio while he was getting a countdown. And then he's just like, at the last 3 seconds, he takes his hand off and you hear 3, 2, 1, and he had this like heartbroken face. He's just like, just run for your life. It was about a second or 2 after the countdown ended that you started hearing the explosions. Now, we're talking about bombs.
This first responder talks about bombs, but the official version keeps telling us that the building collapsed due to fire. You decide what you want to believe. Question number 4. How many different people or organizations have claimed responsibility for the September 11 attacks? None? Only 1? 2? More than 2? The correct answer is none. No one in over 18 years has ever claimed responsibility for the September 11 attacks. We were told that it was bin Laden. We were told by the mainstream media on the very afternoon of September 11. But the same bin Laden, not only has he never claimed them, he has in fact denied being the one responsible for them. Here it is. September 16, 2001, 5 days after the attacks. From Afghanistan, bin Laden says, "It wasn't me." Just think about this. Whoever it was who organized the most important and most devastating terrorist attacks in human history has completely forgotten to claim them. Maybe because those who really did them, for obvious reasons, could not claim them themselves. Question number 5. On the morning of September 11, the 4 hijacked airplanes were free to roam the American skies for over 1.5 hours without ever being intercepted. The question is, how many fighter jets were on alert and ready to take off in order to defend the northeastern sector of the United States on the morning of September 11? None, 4 jets, 40 jets, 400 jets. The correct answer is 4 fighter jets. 4. Despite all the warnings received about an imminent attack with hijacked airplanes, on that morning the military had decided to organize so many military drills at once by sending most of the fighters to Canada and Alaska that only 4 jets were left in order to defend the country, which was openly under threat.
On the morning of September 11, only 4 planes were armed and ready to intercept terrorists in the eastern region of the country.
I've determined, of course, that with only 4 aircraft, we cannot defend the whole northeastern United States. That was the sensation of frustration, of I don't have the forces available to do anything about this.
Obviously, when you have 4 hijacked airplanes flying around and you only have 4 jets available to chase them, you'll always be one step behind. By the time you get to any of them, they have already hit their target. Question number 6. When the top generals in charge of the drills realized that America was being attacked by hijacked airplanes, how long did it take them to call off the drills and recall all the available jets to their base? They did that immediately. It took them about 10 minutes. It took them more than 1 hour. The answer is, it took them more than 1 hour. By 9:03, when the second tower was hit, not only the military, but the entire world knew that America was being attacked by hijacked airplanes. And yet, the generals in charge, Everhart and Myers, allowed the military drills to continue until after everything was over. They did not feel the need to recall their fighters immediately. One wonders why.
He was a hijacked aircraft. He is not a hijacked aircraft. He's taking precautionary measures and he's landing at Cleveland Center.
Only after the Delta flight had landed were the war games finally suspended.
So this is Captain Taylor calling from China, Press Control. Yes. What we need you to do right now is to terminate all exercise inputs coming into Cheyenne Mountain.
By then, also the 4th hijacked airplane had been turned into a pile of smoking rubble.
This takes us to the next question. On the morning of September 11, the top military in charge of the armed forces was, in fact, General Myers. It is under his command that the United States registered the biggest failure in the history of the American national defense. The question is, after the September 11 attacks, General Myers was prosecuted, demoted, and expelled from the army. He was prosecuted but found not guilty. He was promoted to a higher rank. The correct answer is C. Even before an inquiry of any kind was even opened on the events of September 11, General Myers was immediately promoted to a higher rank.
Richard B. Myers, despite the total breakdown under his leadership, was promoted to chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the highest military post in the country. On September 13, confirmation hearings were held for General Myers as if nothing ever happened, while people were still being pulled alive from the rubble at Ground Zero.
One must say that the American military has a unique way of punishing those responsible for the mistakes made in defending their own nation, don't you think? Question number 8. Larry Silverstein was the owner of the Twin Towers. Rather, he had leased the Twin Towers for 99 years. On the morning of September 11, Silverstein had a business meeting scheduled at the very top of the North Tower, the one that was hit by the first plane. But Silverstein miraculously survived. The question is, how did Silverstein survive? He was trapped in the debris of the collapsed tower, but was pulled out alive by the first responders. Instead of attending the business meeting, he chose to go to his dermatologist. He was late at the meeting due to traffic, and this saved his life. The correct answer is B. On that morning, Larry Silverstein did have a business meeting at the Twin Towers. But his wife stopped him on the way out and told him, "But darling, I made an appointment for you at the dermatologist. You can't miss that." And he said, "Oh, well, this is much more important. Do cancel the business meeting. I am going to the dermatologist." And the nice part of it is that he told this story himself on television, as if it were the most normal thing in the world.
The morning of September 11th, Silverstein was scheduled to have breakfast at the restaurant at the top of the North Tower. He canceled at the last minute at the insistence of his wife, Clara, who wanted him to go see his dermatologist.
That particular morning, my wife, God bless her, had made an appointment for me at the doctor. And I said, okay, yes, dear, I'll go.
Everyone who was in that restaurant that morning perished.
Question number 9. How many between policemen, firemen, and first responders have testified to the New York Times about hearing explosions just before and during the collapse of the Twin Towers? None, just one, about a dozen, more than 100. The correct answer is more than 100. And mind you, these are not generical witnesses. Those are on a separate count. Here we're talking about firemen and first responders, which are people who can certainly tell the difference between an explosion and a slamming door.
In August 2005, the New York Times published 12,000 pages of oral histories rendered in the voices of 503 firefighters and emergency personnel who were present at the Trade Center on September 11. Over 100 of them, 1/5 of the total, has reported explosions in the buildings prior or during the collapses.
But the mainstream media keeps telling us that the towers collapsed because of a structural failure. Question number 10. In 2019, an American organization has requested a new inquiry on the collapse of the 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers based on the overwhelming evidence, they say, on the presence of pre-planted explosives in the 3 collapsed buildings. Which organization has made such a request? The Association of Lawyers for 9/11 Truth, the Association of the Victims' Families, the New York Firemen, the New York Police Department. The answer is C, the New York Firemen. We're talking about the firemen from the Franklin Square and Munson Department, who lost 2 of their colleagues in the collapses of the Twin Towers. It was the very commissioner of the department, Mr. Christopher Gioia, to publicly present the petition.
The overwhelming evidence presented in said petition demonstrates beyond any doubt that pre-planted explosives and/or incendiaries, not just airplanes and the ensuing fires, caused the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center buildings, killing the vast majority of the victims who perished that day. Therefore, be it resolved that the Board of Fire Commissioners of the Franklin Square and Munson Fire District fully supports a comprehensive federal grand jury investigation and prosecution of every crime related to the attacks of September 11th, 2001, as well as any and all efforts by other government entities to investigate and uncover the full truth surrounding the events of that horrible day.
The New York firemen lost about 300 of their brothers in the collapse of the Twin Towers. Maybe it's time all these victims and their families receive some justice, don't you think? This brings us to the question number 11. Are there any videos in which explosions can be heard either before or during the collapses of the World Trade Center? No, there is no video of September 11 in which explosions can be heard. There's only one video, but the explosion is barely audible. There are 2 videos. There are more than 2 videos. The correct answer is D. There are more than 2 videos in which explosions can be heard. Here are some of them.
In any case, it's not true that no explosions were recorded by video cameras. In this shot, for example, a series of loud concussions can be heard just before the collapse begins. On the left, covered by smoke, is the South Tower moments before the collapse. And then there were several explosions recorded after both towers had collapsed, like this one from this BBC video.
This one was recorded after both of the twin towers had collapsed and before Tower 7's collapse.
This recording was made between 10 and 11 o'clock. The explosion came from the direction of Building 7.
You gotta get back from here. You know that. You gotta get back.
But the mainstream media keeps telling us that the 3 towers collapsed because of a structural failure. This means the explosions we just heard must have come from some kind of celebration down in Chinatown. Question number 12. How many architects and engineers throughout the world have publicly rejected the official version of the collapses of the Twin Towers and Building 7? 3,000, 300, about 30. The correct answer is 3,000. There are actually more than 3,000 members of the Association of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth who claim that the 3 buildings could not have collapsed because of a simple structural failure. They claim instead that for the buildings to collapse in the way they did, some form of controlled demolition must have been used. All these people have obviously nothing to gain by taking this position, and they got everything to lose. In the professional world, especially in the States, one risks being ostracized or fired by taking such a position, and yet they have been doing it stubbornly for more than 10 years, showing scientific calculations, projects, and diagrams because they're absolutely convinced of the controlled demolition. And yet, they're practically ignored by the mainstream media, and very few people know of their existence. Question number 13. Let's talk now about the kind of airplanes that have allegedly hit the Twin Towers. A regular passenger jet can fly up to 500 miles an hour when it's at 30,000 feet, where the air is very rarefied. As the altitude gets lower, however, the airplane must decrease its speed accordingly, otherwise it would destroy itself due to the increased air resistance. The problem here is that the plane that hit the second tower has been clocked by radars at over 500 miles an hour, even though it was flying near sea level. This is technically impossible. To find out more about this, an independent researcher has called Boeing Corporation. Here the question is, what did the Boeing representative reply when she was asked whether a 767 can fly at over 500 miles an hour near sea level? She laughed. She said it's possible, but you need a highly trained pilot to do it. She said it depends on the weather conditions. You can listen to the answer yourself.
It has to do with the maximum speed of a 767-200 at 700 feet altitude.
Or 200?
Yeah, 767-200, yeah. Like I had asked some people, and they assumed it would be about 250 miles an hour or something.
That sounds pretty likely because at 35,000 feet it's 530 miles.
So there's no way that it could be going 500 miles an hour at 700 feet altitude then.
Not a chance. Not that fast.
She laughed. She said, not a chance. And yet, in the day of miracles, we are told that this also happened. The alternative, of course, is that the planes that hit the towers were not passenger planes at all, but were instead military planes specifically reinforced and powered to be able to reach that kind of speed near sea level. Question number 14. Let's now talk about the black boxes. As we all know, each plane carries 2 black boxes. One records the conversations between the pilots, the other one records the flight data. Thus, for the 2 planes that hit the Twin Towers, we have a total of 4 black boxes that we need to look for in the debris. The question is, Of the 4 black boxes that were carried by the 2 planes that hit the Twin Towers, how many were actually found? All 4 of them? 2 of them? Only 1? None. The answer is none. Officially, not one of the 4 black boxes present at Ground Zero was ever found. Just keep in mind 2 things. 1, black boxes are practically indestructible. They are built with the exact purpose of withstanding even the hardest of impacts. And 2, all the debris that was removed from Ground Zero was carefully combed through at least 3 times by 3 separate teams. There were also human remains to be retrieved in the debris, and this is why extreme care was placed on anything that was removed from Ground Zero. This operator describes how the debris was treated at Ground Zero.
The pile that you see in the background there is what remains of one of the towers. A tractor basically comes in, takes a shovel full of it, and then he feathers it out across the field out there. The guys take rakes and they rake through it. It's very tedious, but we find bones constantly.
As if that weren't enough, the same search was repeated at the Fresh Kills landfill in New Jersey.
Every single piece of debris, having already been combed through at Ground Zero, went through 3 more passes under the careful eyes of officers and agents of the FBI and the NYPD.
And yet we are told that not one of the black boxes was ever found. They found jewels, watches, money, personal documents. They even found fragments of human fingers in the debris. But the black boxes were never found, and one wonders why. Maybe because had we been able to analyze those black boxes, we would have discovered that the planes that hit the Twin Towers were not the same planes that had left the airports a couple of hours before. Question 15. Let's talk now about the plane that hit the Pentagon, the infamous Flight 77 of American Airlines. The hijacker who commandeered the plane did not simply hit the Pentagon on the roof once he was in sight of his target. He chose to perform a wide, circular, descending maneuver instead that brought him to approach the Pentagon near the ground and hit it on the side. This maneuver not only makes no sense, unless of course you really don't want to destroy the entire Pentagon, but it was described as extremely difficult, if not impossible at all, by professional pilots with 30 years of experience under their belt. The question here is, the pilot who drove the plane into the Pentagon was a former Syrian fighter jet pilot hired by Al-Qaeda, a person who had never flown a jet before in his life. He had been Osama bin Laden's personal pilot. He was a flight instructor who owned a flight school in Florida. The correct answer is B. Hani Anjour, the man who allegedly performed the spectacular maneuver at the Pentagon, not only had never flown a jet in his life, but he wasn't even allowed to fly solo with the smaller training single engines, because the instructors didn't deem him able to do so. He could not fly at all, said the instructors. But hey, clearly Allah gave him a helping hand on that day and suddenly infused in him all the skills that he had never had in his whole life. Another miracle of September 11. Which takes us to the next question. How many of the 4 hijackers had actually flown a jet at least once before in their life? 3 of them? Only 1? None of them. The answer is none of them. Not only Anjour, but also the 3 other hijackers had never flown a jet before in their life. And yet, they performed such acrobatic maneuvers and hair-raising dives that the flight controllers on the ground believed that they were looking at military jets.
But nobody knew that was a commercial flight at the time. Nobody knew that was American 77.
What did you think? It was a military flight of some kind?
I thought it was a military flight.
It was really moving fast.
It was moving very fast, like a military aircraft might move at a low altitude.
Air traffic controller Danielle O'Brien stated, "The speed, the maneuverability, the way that he turned, we all thought in the radar room, all of us experienced air traffic controllers, that was a military plane. You don't fly a 757 in that manner. It's unsafe."
It is unsafe, but if you're lucky, you need no training at all. Just close your eyes, grab the controls, and suddenly it's as if you have been flying planes for 30 years. Question number 17. This is very interesting, still regarding the Pentagon attack. After the Twin Towers had been hit, and before the Pentagon was hit, what did a military intelligence official tell an NBC journalist who was at the Pentagon with him at the time? At least we can be safe here. I think we should go home. Let's not take any chances. stay away from the outer ring of the Pentagon, we are next. The correct answer is C. After the Twin Towers had been hit, an intelligence official at the Pentagon told Jim Miklaszewski of NBC to stay away from the outer ring of the building because we are next.
Jim Miklaszewski was the NBC correspondent at the Pentagon.
The first time I heard the word terrorism out of any U.S. official came shortly after the second plane had hit. And I bumped into a U.S. military intelligence official, and I said, look, what have you got? And he said, obviously, this is clearly an act of terrorism. And then he got very close to me and almost silent for a few seconds, and he leaned in and he said, this attack was so well coordinated that if I were you, I would stay off the E-ring where our NBC office was, the outer ring of the Pentagon, the rest of the day, because we're next.
Now I can understand that after the Twin Towers have been hit, somebody at the Pentagon may even surmise that their own building could become a target. But in that case, one would imagine somebody plunging a plane from the sky onto the roofs of the Pentagon, in which case you would tell the journalist, I suggest you go home, we're not safe here. But for him to predict that the Pentagon would actually be hit on the external ring, how can you foresee that unless somebody has already told you in advance? Question number 18. Let's go back for a moment to the hijackers, because these are really incredible people. Mohammed Atta is the most famous of all. He has been called the ringleader, the one in charge of the entire group. So on the evening of September 10th, Atta is already in Boston, from where the plane he intends to hijack is scheduled to leave on the next morning. But what does Atta do? Instead of just going to sleep and wake up fresh and clean, ready to go hijack the plane to Los Angeles, he chooses to rent a car and drives for 2 hours all the way to Portland, Maine. From here, he goes to sleep in a motel and catches a very early commuter flight back to Boston just in time to board the plane to Los Angeles, the one he intends to hijack. The connection between the two planes, however, is so tight that Atta does manage to get on the plane to Los Angeles, but his luggage doesn't make it. The luggage is later found by the FBI going around all alone on a carousel at the Boston airport. The question is, what was found in Atta's luggage that was retrieved at the Boston airport? A copy of the Quran, the flight manuals for the kind of Boeing he intended to hijack, his own will. The answer is all three of these things. Next to the ever-present Quran, this smart hijacker decided to also take along the flight manuals of the plane. You never know. You're in the middle of the flight, you don't remember something, and you might want to take a look at the instructions. Not only that, but this absolute genius decided to also place his own will in the suitcase. The will said, among other things, I want to be buried with my feet towards the Mecca. If they ever find your feet, that is. Because you're sitting in a cockpit and you're about to crash into a tower made of steel, after all. So it's not like the chances of recovering any parts of your body are very high. But just in case, he decided to bring the will along anyway. Of course, for those who are not completely stupid, this miraculous finding of Atta's luggage served one great purpose: to quickly direct the public opinion towards the idea that Islamic hijackers were responsible for the attack. Question 19, still about the hijackers. In the airports from which the 4 hijacked flights took off, like in every other airport in the modern world, there were hundreds of security cameras filming the check-in areas, the corridors, the lounges, the airport bars and restaurants, etc. The question is, how many time-stamped images do we have that show us the presence of the 19 terrorists at any of the departing airports on September 11? More than 100? Only one? Not at all? About 30 different images. The answer is none at all. We don't have a single time-stamped image showing us even one of the 19 terrorists at the airports on the morning of September 11. The only thing we were shown is a sequence depicting 3 of the terrorists at the Washington airport. But this sequence does not have a timestamp, and it was filmed with a regular camera, not a security camera. So, for as far as we know, those images could have been filmed anytime before September 11. Maybe during a dry run the terrorists were made to make under whatever circumstance. And then we were shown this image, depicting hijackers Alomari and Atta going through a security check. This picture is from September 11, but this is not the Boston airport. This is the Portland, Maine airport, as clearly shown in the timestamp that says 5:45 in the morning. This is the infamous connecting flight to Boston, not the flight to LA that was later hijacked. Bottom line, of the 19 terrorists at the departing airports on September 11, we do not have a single image that has been made public. Not one. Is there anybody out there who really wants to believe this? Question number 20. According to the official version, Flight 93 crashed in a single piece in an open field in Pennsylvania. We were told it was the passengers who intentionally crashed the plane in order to avoid it to be used as a weapon against other possible targets. The mayor of Shanksville, Ernie Stuhl, has described what his fellow citizens saw when they first reached the crash site. The question is, what did Mayor Stuhl exactly say? When they reached the site, there were bodies and airplane parts everywhere. They went to the site, but there was no plane. When they reached the site, the FBI had already cordoned off the entire area. The correct answer is B. When the first locals arrived on the site, they said there was a hole, but no plane.
Alle waren wie vor den Kopf gestoßen, weil sie zu einem Flugzeugabsturz gerufen wurden. Aber da war kein Flugzeug. Kein Flugzeug. Sie wurden hier zu der Unfallstelle geschickt und da war kein Flugzeug? Nein, da war nichts. Nur dieses Loch.
And this is the hole allegedly caused by the plane. As you can see, there is no airplane. Not a piece of fuselage, not an engine in sight, not a seat, not a luggage, not a single body visible anywhere. But the plane is there. The FBI tells us that the plane has been practically all buried under the ground, several feet below. The hole is apparently closed up on itself, but the plane is all down there. Question. According to the FBI, the black box with the voice recorder was found 50 feet under the ground, 25 feet under the ground, 2 feet under the ground. It was never found. Correct answer is B. 25 feet under the ground. Now, mind you, 25 feet is almost a 3-story building. And yet, the black box is down there, inside a hole that closed up on itself after having swallowed more than 90% of the plane. This is what the FBI tells us, and we want to believe that because we always believe the FBI. There's still some parts of the plane that are not in the hole, though, and they're scattered all around. Question. At what distance from the hole have the farthest pieces of wreckage been found? 80 feet from the hole, 800 feet from the hole, 8 miles from the hole. Correct answer is C. Some pieces of the plane were found as far as 8 miles from the crash site, near New Baltimore, in a day with no wind, mind you. But the plane was not blown up in flight, of course not. It's all in there, under the dirt, like the FBI says. And then we are the crazy conspiracy theorists, while the mainstream journalists choose to believe this kind of stupidity. But then again, like Upton Sinclair said, it is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. Okay, last question, number 23. According to the official version, a stewardess of Flight 93, C.C. Lyles, called her boyfriend from the plane and left him a message to inform him that they had been hijacked. What were C.C. Lyles' last words left in the recorded message? I have no idea where they're taking us. I'm scared. It's a frame. I hope to see you again. Please hug my children. The correct answer is B. Listen to the recorded message C.C. Lyles left to her boyfriend.
Tuesday, 9:47 a.m.
Hi, baby. Baby, you have to listen to me carefully. I'm on a plane that's been hijacked. I'm on the plane. I'm calling from the plane. I want to tell you I love you. Please tell my children that.
We too can notice the absence of the typical background noise heard inside a plane.
I don't know what to say. There's 3 guys. They've hijacked the plane. I'm trying to be calm.
After saying goodbye, she seems to fumble with the headset while she whispers a few more words into the mouthpiece.
I hope to be able to see your face again, baby. I love you. Bye.
End of message.
Even by playing the segment several times, it remains difficult to hear anything different from the words, "It's a frame."
She was clearly trying to let him know that this whole hijacking story is pure BS. But in institutional documentaries, like History Channel, the last sentence is always cut off, and the phone call ends with, "I love you, goodbye." So people get all emotional, they cry, and they avoid asking themselves serious questions about what really happened on those hijacked airplanes. Okay, so the quiz is over. Let's now look at the score. If you answer correctly from 20 to 23 questions, you're definitely an expert on September 11. You can discuss about these attacks with anyone you want, and you can even hold a lecture on September 11 if you want. If you score between 10 and 19 correct answers, you are relatively well informed about 9/11. You certainly have a higher than average knowledge about these events, and you can certainly take up discussions on it with anyone, even though you might find somebody who knows a little more than you do. If you scored less than 10 correct answers, I'm afraid you're somewhat ignorant on September 11. Or, rather than ignorant, you are a victim of the mainstream propaganda, which every year tells us the fairy tale of the 19 hijackers, armed with box cutters, and the skyscrapers that totally collapse on themselves simply due to fire. So now it's up to you to decide how important it is for each and every one of us to know what truly happened on September 11, even just to avoid for us to be fooled again in case something similar were to happen in the future. So I hope you had some fun, and if you liked the quiz, please pass it around to your friends. It's never too late to inform those who are less knowledgeable than us on what truly happened on September 11, given that the mainstream journalists blatantly refuse to do what is supposed to be their job. Thanks.